225, and my name is Mustafa Abubakar. I'm your anchor for this program. On today's program, we shall start with the concept of special need education. Then we shall look into those terminologies used or terms used in special education. But before we go ahead, the first thing we need to know is the concept of what is special education and what are special educational needs. Many people look into special education in different ways, depending on their understanding about what special education is all about. But the most accepted concept of special education is the concept by the National Policy on Education, 1981, revised 2010. It states that special education is the education of children and adults. Do I come again? Special education is the education of children and adults who have certain difficulties or disabilities, and as a result of these disabilities, they cannot cope with regular classes. They include the visually impaired, the hearing impaired, the mentally retarded or mental stroke intellectual disability. We have the learning disabled, physical and health, speech and language problem, etc., etc. It also includes the gifted and talented who cannot cope with regular classes and tend to stubbornness. Then, on the other hand, Ozoji ED 2003, revised 2010, sees special education this way. He states that special education is the education of children and adults. He said that special education is the education of children and adults who could not go or who could not cope with their educational program. And as a result of this, they need special intervention. This is in line with the concept by the National Policy on Education. But notwithstanding, Ozoji ED further stipulates that special education is an integral part of general education or an aspect of general education that provides appropriate tools, appropriate facilities, appropriate materials for those people considered as exceptional. Now, when you look at the first concept, it states that special education is not just for children, but for children and adults. And it further explains that these adults have one problem or the other. These problems include what? The visual impaired, the hearing impaired, the learning disabled, etc., etc. With the concept of these two learners or of this magnitude, we'll be able to understand that special education does not deal with only blind and deaf. It is a course that looks all over the scope of life. Now, what are special educational needs? The term special educational need is not the same as disability. Special educational needs could mean young or adult person who has 1. Learning difficulties in acquiring basic skills in an early year setting, school or college. 2. Social, emotional, or mental health difficulties, making friends or relating to adults or behaving properly in an early years setting, school or college. Then specific learning disability, which is the third one, with learning, reading, writing, number work, etc. It could also include, which is the fourth one, it could also include sensory or physical need, such as hearing impairment, visual impairment, or physical difficulties. Communication problem is part of special needs, while medical or health condition could also include special needs. In a nutshell, we should know that special education is not just an education for the blind and deaf, or those with physical and with visual and hearing impairments. It is an education or an aspect of general education that looks into all spheres of life. Now, the terminologies used in special need education. We have certain terms we use, and this time as we go along, day in, day out, we shall be using them, and you need to be acquainted or you need to be familiar with these terms or terminologies. The first one is exceptionality. Exceptionality. When we say exceptionality, exceptionality refers to significant deviation or departure from the presumed average in some defined areas such as intellectual ability, physical functioning, and physical characteristics. The departure from these normal trends must be substantial for it to be regarded as exceptional. For example, a man comes into the class and he greets his teacher. A student comes into the class and he greets the teacher. The student is a male child, but on listening to his voice, you discover that he has a female voice. That makes him different, and he becomes what? Exceptional, and so on. Little or average deviation are not considered exceptional. For instance, in an achievement test, student that scores 98 and 10% are said to have deviated substantially from the presumed pass mark or the pass mark of 40. These achievements are exceptional. No. Normally, the deviation is determined from the peculiarities of the so-called average person. So, in a nutshell, exceptionality has to do with anything that deviates from the presumed norms. This could be physical. For example, a man who is about 7 feet tall in the mix of people that are within 5 feet 6 inches, 5 feet 7 inches. You said that person is abnormal in height, and that makes him exceptional from others. A man that walks with crutches, that is prosthesis, as a guide, and other people doesn't use that, that makes him exceptional from others. So exceptionality is that thing that deviates or that makes a difference among others. The second term is disability, impairment. The second term is impairment. When we say somebody has impairment or is impaired, impairment could be that thing that affects the organ of the body. Impairment could be that thing that affects the organ of the body. When a person has a problem with a part of his body, which is generic or resulting from an injury, hazard in the environment, that person is said to be impaired. Impairment becomes a disability when the affected part of the body makes it impossible for the person to function normally. Impairment refers to abnormality, disorder of the physical structure or organ of the body. Malfunctioning of the organ of the body, also referred to as impairment. Abnormality of structure or its malfunctioning is determined from normality of the structure functioning. In other words, impairment is concerned with defects, imperfection, deviation, damage, or shortcoming of the various organs of the body. For impairment to occur, there must be a damage in one organ of the body or the other. For example, when the eye has problem, the sense of seeing or sense of sight is said to be the eye. If the eye has problem, what do we refer to? We say that person has visual impairment. Visual impairment. The visual impairment could affect the eye either as a result of long-sightedness, short-sightedness, or any refractive error or accident or incident that affect the eye later in life, making the person find it difficult to use the eye normally. Sometimes some people are normal, but one way or the other they have one impairment or the other. Like that person that cannot read text except when he uses glasses. You say that person is said to have visual impairment. Some people cannot hear except they use hearing aids. You say that person has hearing impairment. So impairment has to do with the organ that is being affected. Then the next one is the disability. Impairment leads to disability. Impairment leads to disability. Disability is the physical or mental condition which limits a person's activity or functioning. The physical or mental condition which limits a person's activity or functioning. Disabled people, or somebody is said to be disabled if he has an impairment. That is, one organ of the body is not functioning well. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be intellectual, or otherwise. Disability simply refers to loss of ability or loss of function. Literally, disability is made up of two words. This, that is lack or absence, and ability, that is lack of that ability. Put another way, disability means lack of ability or inability. It also means functional limitation or activity restriction. Then we have the last one, which is the handicap. The handicap has to do with a condition. Handicap has to do with condition that befalls somebody at a particular time, meaning that handicap is a condition that makes a person unable to function or perform a task. Handicap has a disadvantage for a given individual resulting from impairment or disability that limits or prevents the fulfillment of the role of normal person or normal individual, depending on your age, your sex, your social and cultural factor. In a nutshell, handicap refers to the disadvantage of having impairment or disability, which prevents or hinder the impaired or disabled person living a normal life. A very good example of this is someone might be able to walk, go around with his daily activities, but along the line, maybe you are given a print and you are not in possession of your glasses, and maybe that glass is meant for you to be able to read. It's your reading glasses. At that particular time, when you don't have the glass with you, you might not be able to read prints or small prints. Your inability to read the print as a result of your visual impairment or visual disability makes you handicapped. But as soon as you put on your glasses and you are able to use the glasses, then we say that person is no longer handicapped, but is visually impaired or visually disabled. So in a nutshell, you find out that all these words are used basically or almost every time in special need education. It is very important to know that in order to understand this course, you have to have a foreknowledge of what it takes, or who are those, or what are the terminologies used to understand what the course is all about. Sometimes we tend to label, and labeling does not help because the world has come to a transition and a transitional change. And as a result of this, labeling is not accepted in special need education. In summary of what I've been saying since morning, I started with the concept of special need education. And I told you that the most accepted concept of special education is that by the National Policy on Education, where it states that special education is not just the education of children, but the education of children and adults. And who are these children and adults? Those children and adults that have certain difficulties or abnormalities or exceptionality. And as a result of this exceptionality, they cannot cope with regular classes or normal environments. I said this includes the visual impaired, the hearing impaired, the learning disabled, the mental stroke intellectual disability. We have the social stroke emotional disorderness, physical and health disability, and other aspects that differentiate somebody. I further told you that Ozoji ED looks into special education as an integral part of general education, or an aspect of general education that provides appropriate tools, appropriate facilities, and appropriate materials for those considered as exceptional. Then I explain what special need education or special educational needs could mean. I said it could mean that the education of young people and adults who have learning difficulties in acquiring basic skills in an early year setting. Those with social, emotional, or mental difficulties who have specific learning difficulties, sensory and physical needs, communication problem, medical or health conditions. All these are those people with special needs. Then I got into what are the terminologies used in special need education. I told you that the first terminology is exceptionality. Exceptionality. And exceptionality has to do with significant deviance from the presumed norms, either physical, mental, intellectual, or otherwise. When we say somebody deviates from the norm physically, I cited the example of a man that is 7 feet. Another good example is somebody that is within 3 feet tall in the mix of people that are between 4 feet, 5 feet, and so on. That makes that person different, and he becomes exceptional. Or the person that has color problem within him, and so on. There are lots of exceptionalities that we could explain and we need to know. And anybody with one exceptionality or the other has the following traits. Impairment. That's the second one. Impairment. Impairment has to do with any organ of the body that is not functioning well or that is dysfunctioned. And this could be either the eye, the ear, any organ of the body. It could be physical impairment and so on. Once an organ of the body is not functioning well, that organ becomes impaired, and impairment leads to disability. I told you that disability has to do with lack or absence or inability to perform certain tasks at a particular time. Then we have the handicap, which is the last part of the topic today. The handicap is a handicapping condition is just a condition that befalls somebody at a particular time. As soon as that condition goes away, you are no more an handicap and you become a disabled or somebody with impairment. Remember, sometimes we fall into financial handicap situation, and that is in a situation whereby you don't have enough money to cater for yourself. But as soon as you have the money, that means you are no more handicapped or you are no more financially handicapped. But in special need education, we mean somebody has handicap condition when at a particular time he cannot perform a particular task. I cited the example of that person that wants to read print and is not in possession of his glasses. And as a result of that, he finds it difficult to read his glasses, and so on. With this, I'm sure you all understand the basic concept of what special education is all about. We find out that special education is more than just a course that looks into the education of just the blind and deaf. And we have seen that there are certain terminologies that are associated with special education. Now, the question I have for you is that in your own time, what do you see, or how do you relate to, or what is your own concept of special education? What is special education based on your own understanding? Then I want you to classify 3 types of exceptionalities. 3 types of exceptionality, either physical, mental, intellectual, or otherwise. I want you to classify them and have a knowledge of what exceptionality is all about. Then if impairment could lead to disability, then who is a visual disabled person? Are you clear with this question? Good. If you are clear with this question, in our next lesson, I shall tell you the objective and the philosophy behind special need education and why special education is very important. But before I go, I want us to learn from this. You should all know that education is very, very important, and nobody is free from social prejudice. You can fall into one problem or the other at a particular time. When you see somebody with one impairment or disability, don't laugh at him, because nobody is free from accidents. Accident can happen as a result of incidental happening. It can be as a result of violence or other things that happen around our society, especially with the present insurgency and with the almighty COVID-19 all over the land. As a result of this, I want all of you to know that nobody is free from one thing or the other. And because of this, we should be careful and try to play safe. Stay safe and always follow the rules and regulation. For today, you might be normal, and tomorrow you might be somebody with special needs. But I pray that none of us will have one impairment or disability that will be above our powers. Thank you. God bless you. Education.